Kyle here from allmediareviews.blogspot.com to continue on the prog and extreme metal album list. I should just mention, though, I have like a couple of things I wanted to talk about in terms of documentaries. I saw the Dio documentary, and I never talked about the there's one other documentary I'm not remembering. And there's some other like stuff I stumbled across, like Apes and Androids related and self-related and everything, but I'll have to do that in a video blog probably. Kevin Gilbert's estate just released, I didn't realize until a week ago, a gatefold version of Shaman of the True on CD. I ordered one. I probably should have ordered two, but anyway, I may go back and order another one. Anyway, so I'm just going to continue on, start left off the top 50 now. The top 50, my favorite 50 prog and extreme or progressive and extreme metal albums. Liquid Tension Experiment, the debut album from 1998. Of course, this is the first project that all the Dream Theater guys did outside of Dream Theater, and it was on the Magna Carta label. And then, of course, I had Liquid Tension Experiment 2. That was a little ways back. I prefer this one slightly. Like that album, it's a great energy record. Of course, it's, jazz fusion influenced, and it's the Dream Theater guys doing an instrumental album, a little bit like the second instrumental Majesty demo that was all instrumental. Anyway, Paradigm Shift, Kindred Spirits has always been a favorite. Freedom of Speech, and Universal Mind. Universal Mind, the hook on that is great. That just the Petrucci lead. I always think of that. I think of this album for Chris and Kevin's Excellent Adventure. I believe that features more Tony Levin, of course. Yeah, I mean, 3-Minute Warning, the whatever. I didn't ever think about this album that way, because 3-Minute Warning is this, whatever that is, a 5-part piece that closes the record out. I remember at the time, I wasn't that into instrumental rock, just purely instrumental rock, and so I wasn't sure I was going to like this that much. And when it came out, I liked it, but I didn't get attached to it. I know a lot of Dream Theater fans were. It really took to hearing people just raving about it a year or two later that it kind of hit me. And then when I was working, it was a great energy CD to go to, album to go to. I played it on the air. I interviewed Jordan Rudess on KFAI and had this in the background, this and stuff from the second one. But yeah, I mean, and I saw them live in 2008. I didn't get to see Fish from Marillion. The one chance I was around 2 weeks later. I couldn't justify the price of seeing 2 trips in short window of time. I wish I had now, because I'll probably never get a chance to see him. But yeah, I mean, it's a great record, a great debut album, and one that, I mean, it holds up. It doesn't sound dated. Very influential too, I found it kind of weird. It's Portnoy wanted to do his own project, and he wanted to work with Jordan. This is actually before Jordan was in Dream Theater. Derek Sherinian was still the keyboard player from Dream Theater. And I know this was sort of a great outlet because they were so frustrated with making Falling into Infinity. It was a way to sort of stretch their muscles and do what they really want without any label interference. But and then they say, well, who do I want from the guitar player? Because Portnoy wrote a whole story. I think it was in the insert, or I don't remember where it was. I think it was in the insert of the CD. Well, I couldn't think of anyone else. It was John Petrucci. And I was like, well, so it's just basically Dream Theater. But he always wanted to work with Tony Levin, of course, too. So that was part of it, because he knew him from King Crimson and Peter Gabriel. And so, yeah, in fact, I've kind of resounded the fact that this album, the one after it, and Scenes from Memory, and 6 Degrees to an extent, those are the best albums that Jordan did. I mean, I like Jordan Rudess. I felt like he was at his peak writing with Petrucci and Portnoy, I guess, at that point. In these, he uses the use of piano, especially on both these records. This one's included. Is one of the. I wish he would do that more. I mean, it's been sort of hit and miss, but it's really tastefully arranged, the stuff. And these were just jams, too. That was the interesting thing. I know they were influenced by Mahavishnu and Return to Forever and El Di Meola and stuff like that. But anyway, number 49, Toxicity from System of a Down, which is the first System of a Down album on this list. in 2001. It's also, by a lot of people's measure, their best record, and I only have a few System of a Down albums on this list. I don't have their whole catalog. I'm going to spoil them in the top 50. I'm number 49 now. They kind of run the gamut with styles like a Faith No More or some of these other bands that just kind of are very diverse. System of a Down, they're not a new metal band, or if they have new metal, they have, not death metal, but technical metal, experimental metal. I mean, my favorites, Chop Suey is a great track. The title track, people say like the title track. Aerials is another one. It's got a lot of their classics and go-tos. I even have the version I actually have on CD. I don't know if I've ever shown it, was like a special colored. I don't know if it was the bonus CD or it was like I thought it was like blue. Yeah, I have the blue bonus CD version right here. Limited edition and stuff like that. But I saw them with the Mars Volta. Before that, I'd sort of heard some of their songs. A friend of mine sent me a mix with some songs from them, among other bands. Some good bands on that mix, I'm remembering it. I was trading with people I knew online. But it was really until I saw them with the Mars Volta, like a power metal show, but I was just sort of won over by them. It's like, well, and then I know that I know Serge Tankian had mixed something from Dredge around the same time. I heard their name. I kept on hearing their name, and then the Fair to Midland happened a couple years later. So, and I actually got Serge's solo album in a vinyl copy, and I got it promoted at a movie because there was like a documentary with him. I forget. I went to Lagoon Theater, but that's kind of the short history with System of a Down. I've never been obsessed with them, but when they're good, they're actually really good. I mean, they use sort of sarcastic humor, like Faith No More. They very much took the baton, from Faith No More. They should do a tour with Faith No More. The contrast between Darren's voice and Serge's voice, of course. But yeah, I mean, System of a Down. They're political too, of course. But I just feel like their music works. The songs that have hooks and they have these funny sections. They're political, sometimes a little too political, but I can tolerate enough for this and some of their other records. When Serge's solo stuff came out, it got to be a little too political for me, unfortunately. But anyway, number 49, Toxicity. Yeah, classic by many people's taste from System of a Down 2001. Number 48, Entropia from Pain and Salvation, the debut album from 1997. And I love this record a lot. I mean, there's other Pain and Salvation stuff coming on the list later, but for a debut album, it's really impressive. I mean, it was many years in the making. They were known as Reality. They had a Hereafter demo and stuff like that. I mean, my favorites on this, I can't, the best song on this to me has always been People Passing By. That funk bass line and then the kind of vocal harmonies with the keyboards interlaced. It's like really crazy odd times. I don't know what's like an 11. And the riff is just great. That's one of the best 20 progressive metal songs I've ever heard. If I ever do I should do a list for that. I probably will, because I'm going to do probably the progressive art rock songs list. I'll probably do a prog and extreme metal song list. Don't be surprised this finishes really high. But, beyond that, Forward's a classic. We're Not Afraid of You. Winning a War. Night Miss, the little tapping. I always think of Van Halen's Finish What You Started, but that was a technique, of course, that started long before that. But I always think it sounds like Eddie Van Halen kind of when he's doing the tapping on that. Great segue. And Plains of Dawn. Oh, that's epic. Stress is really odd, but it's one of those growers. Revival. Oblivion Ocean's a ballad, it's a concept album about like a sort of a fictional fantasy world of sorts, but for like a war that takes place in there. I mean, it's production, it is what it is. They obviously, as time went and some of their albums, the production got better, but it doesn't seem to really hurt it that much. It's a mid-90s prog metal, but they were the avant-garde prog metal. Now they don't seem that avant-garde compared to some of the other stuff on this list, like SikTh or Unexpect, or For the Imperium. But it for traditional prog metal, it's definitely outside that norm. Influences, you hear some of the influences, but from Queensrÿche to Faith No More. But yeah, I mean, I love this debut album. I mean, it wasn't the first album I heard by them, but yeah, People Passing By is just a song I'll never get sick of. So anyway, Entropia from Pain of Salvation, number 48. Number 47. Now, you can argue this isn't really prog metal. I mean, it is. It's the guitarist, obviously, from Fates Warning, Jim Matheos, working with Kevin Moore, formerly of Dream Theater. Of course, Kevin Moore had shown up on Fates Warning's Pleasant Shady Grey, and he's on Still Remains, right? Blanking on Disconnected. And so it was not weird for him to work with him. Mike Portnoy was involved, and unfortunately the outcome of the album and then the album that came after it wasn't exactly as maybe Portnoy originally intended. But I think Portnoy thinks this is a pretty good record. He's not, he likes this record from what I remember. But I mean it's prog metal of a sort. It's sort of influenced by industrial music, influenced by like sort of art pop, or left of center pop at points, and classic rock. They covered one of the bonus tracks on here is a cover of a Neil Young song, New Mama. But they also did a cool cover of Set the Heart for the Controls of the Sun. Yeah, by Pink Floyd. Use samples and everything, but I mean, every song on this record works. That's kind of why it's this high. I mean, I don't think of this as a prog metal album, the first OSI album, Office of Strategic Influence. It came out in early 2003, right when led by Bush, the decision to go to Iraq. It was weird. I always associate this with the Iraqi War. My favorites, I mean, a lot of people think Shutdown. That features Steven Wilson, of course, doing the vocals on it. It's among the favorites on it. I like the New Math and OSI, the first two tracks that started. I love Head. Hello Helicopter's great. The mood, the dreaminess, the mood, kind of melancholy at times on this. I mean, it has a very militaristic, government-based kind of, and there's samples from Bush, like what we could tell the public and what we can't tell the public, and all this stuff. It's an interesting idea. I don't know if OSI really did this after this in terms of the sort of subject matter and what they're the kind of political, geopolitical, militaristic, intelligence, the agencies, from CIA to FBI to whatever, NS, all the different agencies. I mean, it was cool, sort of, even like had the passports on in the artwork and everything. But yeah, I mean, Stand By Looks Like Rain is melancholy. It's a really terrific, well crafted album. That's, you could call it heavy at times. Is it metal? Is it prog? Is it industrial prog? Whatever. It's just a really well written record. And I love Fates Warning. Jim Matheos had a lot to do with this. And he, the weird thing is, of course, I've mentioned this when I got this on vinyl like a year and a half ago. Daniel Gildenlow at one point was working with this and was going to do vocals. And there was even some talk about John Arch. There was some potential for John Arch to do vocals for this as well. Same year, of course, John Arch put out the EP, A Twist of Fate, so he did get to work with Jim Matheos around the same time, and Mike Portnoy. Just imagine, though, the thing Daniel Gildenlow supposedly had written, demoed, or just, a 27-minute piece with vocals, and, there was a bonus track on this one that was kind of a mixture of a bunch of different songs that were chopped up, but together, called The Thing That Never Was. See, it was 17 minutes. But I thought it was like 27 minutes. What could have been, if that ever somehow comes out where there was recordings of that, oh, man, some of us fanboys would just go apeshit for it. But whatever. That being said, it's a great record regardless. I'm going to have to stop now. Alright, so LSI, I got interrupted there, unfortunately. Number 47, Office of Strategic Influence. Number 46, Death of a Dead Day by SikTh. This is the top SikTh record on this list. By most people's accounts, their favorite SikTh record. 2006, before they went on a hiatus. This is the last thing they did. Yeah, metalcore. I don't really think there's really much gent on it. I mean, if it's tagged with gent. Yeah, it is. It's metal. It's definitely metalcore. It's experimental. it's more refined than the Trees record that came out before, a few years before that, 2003. I don't know, again, go-tos, Bland the Street Bloom, the first track, Flogging the Horses, Summer Rain. They're all over the place in a good way. They're crazy technical, crazy good, crazy funny. The singer has the different styles he uses, of including talking in a sort of Dr. Claw kind of way, and but I feel like this album they kind of improved in some ways. It's less raw, it's more refined. Production wise, songwriting wise, and it was. I don't know if we can say much more about it. It's a weird title, of course, but it fits sort of in the death metal aesthetic, although it's not even considered death metal, which is funny. But it's crazy. You're looking for something crazy that works. It's SikTh, and this is their best record. This is their peak, and that's why it finishes this high on my list. I can't really say a lot more about it. But it's mood music. All their music, like Unexpect, some of these bands, it's not something I would listen to addictively. It's not pop music. There's moments you can get stuck in your head, but they're not like hooks exactly. But it came on vinyl a few years ago on Record Store Day, but unfortunately I wasn't able to find it. I've wanted to get it ever since. I think it was just in the UK. It might have been. I think it was, but. Anyway, SikTh's Death of a Dead Day, number 46 on the list. Number 45, Deliverance. The first Opeth album I really got into. I prefer this album very much to Blackwater Park and Still Life to an extent. But it's kind of I don't know. I mean, it's Steven Wilson is on this. The segues, I always think of the interval patterns of a few other bands that used them. I can't remember. Was it right around the same time? The da na 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 na. There's a prog band. I don't know, it was like Nexus or someone like that. IQ. There was a band that some of my friends that liked Opeth that loved prog. I heard the same interval pattern. It was just weird. The title track is probably my go-to, Fair Judgment. All I remember is when I got into Opeth, or when I first checked them out, rather. They were touring with Porcupine Tree. A little before that, actually, because I'd seen them by themselves, just as a headliner. I forget who the openers were at the old Quest Club. I remember, like, with the growling parts, I laughed at them, but I still kind of grew to like them, and even to this day, I still sometimes laugh a little bit, but that was the big thing. It's like, well, we get a laugh to some seriously dark, dark, brooding, fast, segueing music with these acoustic sections in the middle. But this album, I think, beginning to end, is one that really works well for me, and that's why I like it a little more than some of the other Opeth albums. And it's well received. I mean, it's not like looked down upon. This is one of their classic records in their peak of incorporating prog metal with, death metal. And they're still doing the death metal stuff. They're not doing it anymore. So, anyway, Deliverance from Opeth, number 45. So we have System of a Down again. So, I mean, you can choose between Toxicity and this. These two records are pretty close, I consider. Their last album, the last album actually was Hypnotized, but it was a kind of a double album. The last year, the year they released a new studio album, Mezmerize. The song that I always think about this album for, first and foremost, is, I believe it's Old School Hollywood. Yes, and they talk about Hollywood. Yeah, there's two songs, Lost in Hollywood, I forgot about that, but the whole Tony Danza cuts in line, Tony Danza, and then the little synthesizer part that goes, da-na-na-na-na, I always think of this album first and foremost for that, but, I mean, it was the album that got me into them, so I have a little bit of a sentimental motivation or appreciation for it. BYOB is a really catchy and energetic song. Violent Pornography, Question. I mean, System of a Down was sort of hitting on all cylinders, I found, with this album. This and Toxicity. I mean, their other records have their moments, but those are my go-tos usually, and I I kind of felt just overall this one worked slightly better than Toxicity, but it's really splitting hairs, of course. Radio, video, I mean, it's, the humor metal, the humor, avant-garde, alternative, crazy, at times almost energetic power metal-like. They're an eclectic metal band. That's the best way to put it. They don't really fit into one style that well. Faith No More was similar in a way, or is similar in a way. There's an obvious influence. People have compared them to them. But yeah, Mezmerize, from 2005. It's an album that I've listened to many times. It's only 36 minutes, so it doesn't go on too long. I mean, they just kind of get to the point, and it has enough mixture of Darren and Serge. A lot of people don't love Darren's voice. I can tolerate it, but if he was the only singer, I probably would have issues. I mean, overall, I guess I prefer Serge a little bit. And is it political? Of course it's political, but again, not over-the-top political the way some of his solo stuff has worked. But anyway, Mezmerize, number 44 from 2005 from System of a Down. Number 43, the Faceless, Akeldama, another debut album from 2006. This is a badass technical death metal album for a debut album especially. And like a lot of these records, it's only 33 minutes. It's kind of less is more. And they used they used keys on this, I believe. And so it was like, I didn't realize death metal could have keyboards, and I didn't know really like melodic death metal. But I heard this, it kind of just, oh yeah, you can add, and it was not exactly like Between the Buried and Me, because it was in 2007 when I got into a lot of these bands, 2007, 2008. Between the Buried and Me was the catalyst, but Between the Buried and Me was very excessive with their instrumental sections. The Faceless on this album kind of was more economical, and the compositions worked, and so the records that came out after that, I don't know if I found to be even half as good. This debut album just seemed to really work from beginning to end. I can't remember where they're from, the Faceless. They're from California. It doesn't surprise me. I know they have had lineup changes and some issues in the band, but this debut album, Akeldama, is just terrific from them. One of the best records in the sort of extreme metal of the 2000s genre of sorts, whatever you want to call it. Number 42, Operation Mindcrime, Crime from Queensrÿche. So I had Empire a little before this, a little bit lower. I like this album. I would say, I kind of go back and forth. I probably would normally put Empire ahead of it, but I know it's a great classic, highly influential concept album. It was a breakthrough of sorts for Queensrÿche. Critically acclaimed. It's got a ton of really good songs on it. I go down the list. Sweet Sister Mary. Once played that on the radio with Sweet Madam Blue by Styx and Sweet Charlotte Pike by Transatlantic. Revolution Calling, Anarchy X, Breaking the Silence was a sort of a staple and like a minor hit on metal radio. I Don't Believe in Love also as well. Eyes of a Stranger is probably my favorite track, though, if I was picking one. That's an epic closer. The chorus, sort of the motif or the anthem on that. Spreading the Disease is another one they play live frequently. I mean, of course, they played the whole thing live many times, which I never got to see, Of course, Jeff Tate's not in the band now, so, Jeff Tate has played it too. He kind of has been living on some of the legacy of this record. But the concept itself, The Needle Lies, that was the other track. I'm just thinking about that. When I first bought it, I didn't love it, but that song was sort of the go-to. I think I was suggested that song. It's a shorter track. Don't ever trust the needle. But it was kind of there. Yeah, I mean, the metal could do stories. Sabotage did it. Eventually Dream Theater did it, and doing in metal. A concept story album, a rock opera of sorts. But is it highly technical? Nah, not that. I mean, Queensrÿche to me has been more about atmosphere and textures, and the twin guitar leads with Jeff Tate's soaring vocals. It hasn't been about chops as much. But, it's good enough, and, I kind of see this as it's about properly rated. I don't think it's underrated. I don't think it's overrated, really. It does get mentioned a fair amount, but it kind of lives up to it. But, it's not the last Queensrÿche album on this list, though, so I'll say that much. But it's up there. Number 42, Operation Mindcrime from Queensrÿche from 1988. The same year that Fates Warning put out No Exit, which is not a concept album exactly, but sort of. It's kind of interesting. Shadow Gallery's self-titled debut album. It wasn't an EP. It was actually a full-length, which doesn't actually include real drums. Sadly, it has a drum machine. But when I finally got used to Mike Baker's vocals after a couple years after buying the CDs, this thing hit me like a ton of bricks. I was listening to this a lot. Compositions are just so good. I love Carved in Stone, Tyranny, and Room 5 are all on this list, but this album was always my sort of... I had the most sentimental attachment because this is the one I first got into them, so I'm naturally going to like this sometimes in some ways more, just because I have more nostalgia for it, or the most nostalgia for it. It just has these hooks, these like parts. Dark Town, Dance of Fools, the opening track, Mystified, Say Goodbye to the Morning. The little part, the little keyboard parts that kind of echo back and forth, and then of course the epic Queen of the City of Ice, which is like a total fantasy song. But all their music seems very fantasy based, but it like captures like some princess that's frozen in ice and everything, and the guy's gonna go save her. I mean, that's more or less that's my interpretation from remembering a lot of the lyrics. But all right, we got the kitty coming on camera. All right, what do you think of Shadow Gallery? You don't really know them, but you're hearing about them. Kaja. So, yeah, I mean, the only issue with this album is the drums, but the music itself, the compositions, the actual music, the instrumental parts besides the drums, are so good and memorable. It was one of the best records that ever came out on Magna Carta to me. I even got it on vinyl a few years ago. I ordered it, and I did have to pay a lot for it too, which was surprising. But so number 41, Shadow Gallery's self-titled album from 1991. I think it was 92. Whatever. I thought it was the same year that Dream Theater. I think that's not that's incorrect. Dream Theater. I think it came out the same year as Dream Theater's Images and Words. But anyway, speaking of Dream Theater, it's showing on camera. So number 40, The Apologist from East of the Wall. It's a weird personal thing with this album, which I really don't want to don't believe this is really anything to do with it, but I loved Farmer's Almanac, and then they came on tour here, and they put out a record right after that I didn't like, the previous record, Resentment. And I mentioned something like that online, maybe in the blog. I always felt like, well, did they write an album as a response to my comments? Because I developed a little bit of a relationship with them. Saw them at this like art gallery where they had wine and apples or something. Anyway, so I kind of wondered. I mean, it's probably not. It probably wasn't me. They're from New Jersey, East of the Wall. But unlike Farmer's Almanac, this has a lot of extreme vocals. And it's just more technical. See, this album gets better with each listening. This is 2011. Full of it really suggests composed the suite. The production on Resentment was the biggest issue. It wasn't the writing. The production was just terrible. I could not handle it. The cymbals clip constantly. But varied vocals, multi-part harmonies. This is a terrific sort of breakthrough, but responsive record that just, it's like, you want us to sound clean and sound our production to sound clean, and we can be highly technical and use vocals and stuff like the title track, horseback riding on the bicycle world, in a bicycle world rather. Nath, the opening track is great. It's just, this is balls to the wall riffs. It works. It totally worked. I was almost shocked how good this record came out. And, it was weird. This was in that period of time when I was souring on Between the Buried and Me to an extent. I think it was the same year they put out Between the Buried and put that mini album, the first part of Parallax, which I liked, but this was in my top 10 records from 2011. I can't. Post-hardcore, progressive metal, this, I think it's considered their top record, I'm pretty sure. Let me just take a look here. It is. So it's the most like popular or most rated record, 292 ratings. So The Apologist is terrific. I love this record. One of my top 10 records, top 30 records of the 2010s probably, and one of the top 5 metal records of that decade, I would say. So anyway, number 39, Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from Remember from Dream Theater. Well documented, highly influential, a comeback or a breakthrough record. They got to reproduce it on their own. The concept album they did, it's like it's sort of like their 2112 in some ways. It's a great record. I've found over time I don't enjoy it as much as I initially did, but I did play the hell out of it, of course. That's the peak of my Dream Theater fandom, you could say, in some ways. This and the next record, I would say, but the story is interesting. The Dead Again, influence and similarities are not. That's been documented too. From a music standpoint, I always look toward Finally Free as my favorite, even though the long drum solo from Portnoy and stuff like that. But I always love Strange Deja Vu, the vocal arrangement in that especially. And the real crazy sections like in Home, Dance of Eternity, Beyond This Life, of course, those are the busiest, songs probably on the record. Home is kind of badass. It has that, Middle Eastern riff and everything like that. I guess I typically like to listen to this all at once, but I haven't done that in a long time. I always associate it with Friday nights because, there's a line Friday evening, in Finally Free, was it? Of course, Spirit Carries On, which, am I missing something? Spirit Carries On, is it? Oh, here it is. I always think it's the second to last track. When I heard that, I was like, oh, this should be on the radio, and the Pink Floyd, is it, from Dark Side of the Moon, not Breathe, but, not Speak to Me. I forget what track it is off of the Dark Side of the Moon. But very similar with the vocal harmonies from Teresa Thomason, who sounds like she's singing on Dark Side of the Moon. But it's a moving album, it's got a lot of quotes and references that people talk about. I hear, guitar riffs from this in other bands, including Dredge, who put out their debut album, Leitmotif, around the same time. But and Between the Buried and Me. There's some Between the Buried and Me stuff, I want to say off Colors and or Alaska, that some of the riffs remind me a lot of some of the stuff on here. But Seeds for Memories is a classic. I don't rate it quite as high as some of their others, not to spoil it too much, but surprise, surprise. But it's a little bit like Operation Mindcrime, where it's not underrated, it's not really overrated. Maybe a little bit. I don't see it overrated the way I see Close to the Edge overrated. Or Fear of a Blank Planet, especially from Porcupine Tree. Anyway, 39 or 38. So I've talked about this a fair amount the last couple months. Toehider's I Have Little to No Memory of These Memories, and is Toehider? I had the other Toehider album. Metal, progressive metal. Yeah, they are. Or he is. It's Mike Mills. It's an Australian musician, known maybe best for Arion, who I'm not a fan of Arion. So, ironically, but I've been won over by this over the last few months. It's kind of crazy how he can write a 47-minute track and incorporate all these styles, and somehow it flows pretty well together. Although, in the long run, I don't know how often I'm going to be able to go back to this because of the length of it. But I think, when I was really obsessed with like Thick as a Brick and A Pleasant Shade of Grey, it's kind of in that vein where I know it's awesome. I'd like to listen to it all at once, but I'm not going to be able to listen to it as often as some, maybe even the other Toehider records, because it is just one track and you need to have 45 plus minutes, 47 minutes to listen to it all. But there's channeling different styles, so many styles of prog, or just classic rock. The Jimi Hendrix element, the Jethro Tull element, the Queen element, but some of it does have a little bit of a Devin Townsend element as well. And doom metal at points, a little Black Sabbath-y. It's just the vocal arrangements especially win me over, and a lot of the phrases, the guitar parts, and just the way he kind of tells. It's this concept. It's a story. The story I haven't read through all the way. I haven't really read through the lyrics that much, and I actually ordered the vinyl and still have yet to receive it. I need to follow up on that. But anyway, from 2022, number 38, Toehider's I Have Little to No Memory of These Memories. Really a masterpiece. One of the best records this decade. In fact, if I had to choose one, it would be hard to put anything above it. I mean, even though it was my album of the year, but Number 37, The Spectre Within from Fate's Warning. Of course, again, I talked about this on the Fate's Warning series of videos, but it is the highest and my favorite album from John Arch, of the Fates Warning John Arch albums, the John Arch Fates Warning albums rather. Epitaph, the 12-minute piece, and Traveler in Time, and the Apparition. Those are my three favorites. Epitaph is I get goosebumps with that every time. The little synths, the dreamy synths, and guitar riffs. Apparition is just fun, energetic. The story, the lyrics about the first is a young man, white dove in his hand. The second is I forget what the phrase is. Anyway, it's like the Indiana Jones Grail thing. Reflected what you are and what you are to be. The third, fourth and last, no reflection. Yeah, talking about mirrors, the golden mirrors. Anyway, and then the Traveler in Time with the clocks and stuff. The rest of the record's pretty good. Orphan Gypsy, Without a Trace, Pirates of the Underground, and Kyrie Elysian. I think they fit the flow of the record. It's a classic case of the sound of a record having three standout tracks, but the flow of the record isn't hurt by the rest of it, so it kind of gets bumped up a little bit like Hemispheres from Rush. But I sometimes listen to those tracks individually, but if I'm listening to the album beginning to end, I don't typically skip tracks. So anyway, 1985's The Spectre Within, the second album from Fates Warning, the last album with Victor Arduini, and the first album with the last album with Victor Arduini. Anyway, number 36, Angels Cry, the debut album from Angra with Andre Matos, of course, from 1993, and includes a few covers, but there's a big classical music influence on this record. Andre, of course, I love him. He's my favorite singer, so his vocals stand out. Songs like Carry On, Angels Cry, Evil Warning, Streets of Tomorrow, and the Kate Bush cover, Wuthering Heights. He pulls it off. I think Toehider did a cover of that, Mike Mills. But I think Andre, I have a soft spot, and I have a nostalgia and sort of a bias for Andre Matos. But and Time. In fact, if I chose one track, my favorite track on this, I kind of lean toward Time in some ways. It's terrifically arranged. Some of the horn sections and the symphonic with strings and the guitar parts are just, I don't know if some of that stuff is done just on the keyboard. He might have, but really impressive debut album. And it's got sort of a melancholy element in some of the lyrics, Carry On, there's a meaning to life and everything. It's sad because Andre did pass away a couple of years ago. But Angels Cry, and The Lasting Child. I haven't listened to this album. Like, The Lasting Child, I remember always enjoying. I haven't listened to this album in a long time. I haven't listened to that song in a while. So, but, I kind of hold the Andre Matos albums with Angra in very high regard. I have a very, it's sacred. They're sacred ground for me, or sacred records. So, anyway, is it power metal? Yeah, it is, but it also is prog, so... Kitty Cat Kaja is looking for attention, of course. So, number 35, Feeding the Abscess from Martyr. Well, I talked about Airfell a few videos ago. This is a little bit like Airfell without some of the sort of folk elements, but from a standpoint of it, the Airfell album, the last Airfell album, rather, it's just amazing energy. It's very technical, and just the flow of it is so good. This is one of a top 10 or top 20 energy records probably ever. Yeah. It is technical, but to me, it's so infectious, the energy on it, that I can't, there's a lot of records on this list that I like a lot of have a lot of similar elements in tech death, how do you compare it to Faceless or, you named some of the tech death albums I've already named. This is one of the best, flowing technical death metal albums ever, for sure. And it was their last record, I believe. And again, I've never heard their other records, which I'm guilty of that. Warp Zone especially. But, a lot of people consider Feeding the Abscess their peak, and then they end up breaking up after this from 2006, Feeding the Abscess in 2006. No, they broke up right after this. It tells on their profile. Disbanded 2020, so it was a few years after. It's too bad. They probably were working on a new album, and they could have released another album, but they had a live album. No. Whatever, Martyr, not Martyr AD, not to be confused with Martyr AD. One of the best Canadian extreme metal bands. Yeah, it's a terrific record. People love it, and there's a reason for that. Number 35. Number 34, Parallels from Fate's Warning. So yeah, I mean this is their sort of not their attempt at radio, but their most commercial. I talked about this again in the Fate's Warning series, but favorites being the 11th Hour, the 8-minute track, 8-minute, 12-second track, Eye to Eye, the single, it's real catchy. Leave the Past Behind. Don't Follow Me, The Road Goes On Forever is a dreamy ballad that closes out this album. It's an album that it's just full of great songs. There's a few albums on this list like that where it's not as heavy, although it gets heavy enough at points, but it's not as heavy as obviously many other Fates Warning albums. It's not as technical as Perfect Symmetry, the album that it came after, but and I have a lot of nostalgia for it. When I was looking for bands like Rush, I got into Dream Theater. This was the first suggested album, and I totally understand it. This came out the year before Images and Words, but you could say in some ways Images and Words owes a lot to this album because it was a similar sort of approach of making somewhat technical music that's heavy accessible. I mean, Rush was doing it to a point, but Rush never really fully metal. And around this time, this is when around past Presto and then Roll the Bones. They weren't even nearly as heavy as they had got. But I still like that period of Rush. But I love Presto. But anyway, Fate's Warning's Parallels. Has the man dying in the bed, of course, with the girl. Number 34. Number 33, the first Soundscape album on this list. Grave New World, an album that was recorded in like 98, 99, but was not mixed properly, and then took about 10 years before the guys got access to Pro Tools and was able to properly mix it and then release it. Soundscape, I feel like I'm one of the biggest fans because they're an obscure prog metal band that once got written up in Metal Edge and played at Power Med Festival 3 times and at Prog Day. The prog and prog metal scene knew them a little bit like Crimson Glory to an extent, but this was highly influenced by the likes of like Marillion and Fate's Warning and Rush, which go figure. But I always found especially Rob Thorne's voice was somewhat distinct, and the styles were Todd Thorne's guitar style, using the spacey textures at points. And the bubbly synths that Rob used kind of gave them a distinct element. I wrote some long thing in here. It's just, but yeah, I mean, just barely anyone knows them, and I gave it 5 stars at the time. I don't know if I'd quite believe it 5 stars, but this album meant a ton to me. Now, a few of the songs, like 3, 4, 5 songs, like the first, let's see here, Digital Lover. No. I want to say Man and Machine, of course. So Alone and Concentration. I want to say those 4 songs were on the Man and Machine EP. So they were kind of re-recorded and remixed. I like the versions better on here. Digital Lover, the title track, and the Server. Rob had sent me, actually, because I had talked about how I loved them so much, their previous record, Discovery. And he had sent me. So I'd heard them, but I had not heard them in this mix. And Concentration, oh man. Age of Wonder, Generation Y, Zombie Nation, Resurrection. It's a concept album about computers basically taking over the world. A little bit like Tyranny from Shadow Gallery, prog metal, doing Matrix, story like concept albums. And your claws are a little too sharp there, buddy. Go figure. But I still love this record as much as it sort of is. It's the style of prog metal that it's not as heavy. There's no death metal in it, of course, as some metal on this list. But, it's for a Dream Theater fan, for a Fates Warning fan, it's obvious. They were on the Fates Warning tribute album, Soundscape. They did Veda Morgana. But, I think that part of it was the sound and the production on it was one reason why I love this record. Another reason why was what it sort of meant to me. Just because I didn't think it was ever going to come out. I knew they had recorded it because I had talked to Rob about it and he sent me those demos and stuff. So to finally get to hear it was just a massive deal. They've actually recorded and released a few songs the last few years, but they're supposed to be doing an album. I don't know if that's still going to happen. Hopefully someday. I should send them a message or something because I haven't talked to them in a long time. But anyway, Soundscape's Grave New World from Connecticut, like Fates Warning, Soundscape. 2009, number 33. Number 32, Queensrÿche's Promised Land. Now, this is the top Queensrÿche album on this list from 1994. I mean, I love Operation Mindcrime and Empire, but I kind of came to conclude that this is their most ambitious album, and thus I kind of appreciated it the most. The whole concept behind it, where there was an enhanced CD. They did a broadcast on pay-per-view where they had like commentators and stuff once. They played the whole thing. There's moments of like saxophone on here. I mean, it's got a lot of songs I enjoy. I Am I and Damage, those two are the heaviest songs probably on here. And they're great. They're epic in some ways. Kind of industrial sounding at points. Lady Jane, though, is probably my go-to favorite track. That's the piano ballad. I always think of like the Jane from like not British literature, but sort of Western civilization in whatever that was, the 1500s. I always wonder if that was a reference to her. Probably not, but I think she was known as Lady Jane Grey, and also like Jane Eyre, but Jane Eyre was a different book series, I know. Anyway, it's a great piece. It's gothic sounding stuff, the build and the guitar solo from Chris DeGarmo. Bridge is another track. I got the single for that, which had some good B-sides. My Global Mind, and Someone Else. Someone Else is sad. It's like the end of the story. They're kind of lost. Like I'm someone else. You're looking at looking at me. I'm someone else now. But I never did play the game. I didn't have a computer to do it. And I know I got one of the enhanced CD versions of it. I did get it on vinyl a couple years ago. I remember that. I think I found it at Amoeba, just like Extreme's Three Sides of Every Story. Those two records I found the same time. I would look for it on vinyl for many years. But yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people don't even think it's like a metal album, or they look at Empire as the last great Queensrÿche album. I go one album past that. Although I actually don't mind the record Here in the Frontier, the album that followed it, even though there was not a lot of progressive rock on that or progressive metal on that album. As the last album, Chris DeGarmo, and the album that I saw them on that tour, they had this big ear. They headlined at Target Center. They did pretty well too, but they were riding on the coattails at that point. Basically, Sin Silent Lucidity was just everywhere. So number 32, Promised Land from Queensrÿche. 31, Ritual from Shaman, the debut album after Angra, after Andre Matos, Luis Mariucci, and Riccardo Confessori left Angra after that, conflict of, artistic direction or whatever, from Fireworks. They formed Shaman, which Shaman was a track off the Holy Land record. I don't know if that was directly the reason why they chose the name, but whatever. And this was a terrific debut album that came out, and I loved it. I played the hell out of this in 2002. The kind of maybe centerpiece of the album is Fairy Tale, the sort of an epic ballad, very symphonic. Andre's maybe greatest vocal performance ever. He just, this falsetto is so great on that. He's just, all the emotion and passion comes out of him. The video reflects it too. I guess it's about a vampire, I think. Anyway, the track before it, Over Your Head, is crazy good too, and it features actually a guest spot, I believe, from Derek Sherinian, plays a keyboard solo on it. Former Dream Theater. At this point, he was doing Planet X. I don't know if he did it through the mail. He probably did it. I don't know if he was actually there, but Blind Spell, Distant Thunder, Here I Am. A lot of great symphonic, tracks with tribal percussion, just like they did in Angra. This is a great album, classic. I don't know if it ever came out on vinyl. It doesn't look like it shows it. I would buy it in a heartbeat, though. Yeah, I mean, Pride is the only song that sounds almost overtly power metal, which I could take or leave. I mean, it's Andre at least. It's Andre singing and doing the arrangement. So, but I mean, it's probably my least favorite song on this record. I think it would have been probably my album of the year from 2002 or close to it. It would have been right up there that year with Remedy Lane and A Sick Degrees of Inner Turbulence. Had the one last track, which I was only sort of lukewarm about. The title track is great, Ritual, Anyway, Shaman from Ritual from Shaman from 2002, the debut album from Brazilian progressive power metal band Andre Matos led. Number 30. Let's see. I don't know. I want to go here. We're looking at 35 minutes. I'll try to do the top 25. So I'll do 25 and 25 if I can fit it all. So I'll keep on going. Superior, Connected. This album actually features the services of Andre Matos on a song. He was friends with the band, I guess. Younique. This is the top Superior record. It's my favorite Superior record. Came out in 98. The song, what is it? Nothing. That epic. That's a song that Pain and Salvation did this. A few other bands have done this where you think the song is over, but then it goes into another section. The piano part in that is great. God's Funeral, the track before it, it's 8 minutes. Be Mine, Amok, Free-Minded. Free-Minded, I think that's the one with Andre. It's very funky. There's like a lounge, jazzy lounge? A lounge/jazz element to a lot of the songs on here, which, to me, that's what kind of put them over the top on this record, over Behind even, which I love Behind, but a little bit like the Mars Volta, where I loved the Lost in the Comatorium, but they added more colors and textures on Francis the Mutant, sort of won me over even higher. He went up another level for whatever. Detect Myself, This Promise. Promise is a sad ballad, but, my favorite Superior Does Nothing. Yes. Yeah, it's Detect Myself that Andre shows up on. So, I really appreciate this record a lot. Is it the record that would be most recommended for Superior if you've never heard Superior? I don't know. I think probably Behind is the easiest one to get into, but a lot of people I think have found that this record is their favorite. That of the Superior fans, the prog power scene, because they're super obscure, of course, from Germany. The album came out in 1998, so I, in fairness, did not hear it until a few years after that because I didn't know about it. Because at that point I didn't even like Superior really, from my memory. I don't remember, so I wasn't keeping tabs on them. And I think actually there's a couple bonus. I forgot about that. There's a bonus song. I always wanted to get was it the Japanese version? Yeah. There's some bonus tracks, which I think Andre is on. Andre Matos is also on. There's a version of Why. That's right. There's a version of Why from from the first record Behind with Andre, and it's like I've heard it. It's online, but it's like I need to buy this thing. But I don't know if I had to pay a pretty penny for it. I should wishlist it on Discogs. So anyway, number 30, Superior is Younique. Number 29, Theories of Flight from Fates Warning. Again, another Fates Warning album that I've talked about in the last few months. But this was a late career highlight, of the people have called it. It has the song The Light and Shade of Things, which is just unbelievable classic record with huge amounts of emotion and passion from Ray Alder and the way it's composed. From the Rooftops, The Ghosts of Home, the bookend, sort of book. I mean, Theories of Flight, the sort of samples and stuff like that. It's kind of surreal ending to the album, but I kind of look at The Ghosts of Home sort of closing out the album, the real proper part of the album, and From the Rooftops opening the album. Bobby Johnson Beck's performance is great on those two tracks. 7 Stars is a great catchy track, very kind of thematic. SOS, White Flag too. Like Stars Ours I've seen is the only song that I like that song, but it's probably my least favorite on here. That song grew on me. I love this record. I was almost not shocked, but very surprised how much I enjoyed it. That year in 2016, when it came out, The Seeker from Cloud Cult was like my favorite record, and I almost was convinced nothing was going to be better in this album. Maybe because I love Fates Warning, I'm a fanboy, even more than Cloud Cult probably usurped it, but I mean, it's kind of splitting hairs, of course, for that, but I did give it the album of the year that year because it was so damn good. It was so surprising how good it was, I guess, in a way. Anyway, number 28, Incursa from Spawn of Possession. This was sort of, in some people's mind, the real like tech death and death metal fans, the peak, or the peak of technical metal in some ways. And I'll be honest, I had not heard Spawn of Possession much before this, even though I'd been into extreme metal for a few years. So this came on, I just saw a lot of talk about it, and then I checked it out, and it lived up to it. I mean, it is really technical. I find that this album is the most polished technical metal album on this list, probably. It's like taking almost like what Meshuggah did or Gojira, and doing it in a more like mind-blowing instrumental way in a way. I'm like, just, it's crazy, you know. I mean, it's taking, you know, like the crazy sort of absurd time signatures and making them work, you know. The Evangelist is a 9-minute, almost 10-minute song. That would be among my favorites. But it's a trip, you know. What is it, 52 minutes? It's kind of like, instead of being less is more is more in an effective way. There's some cases when more is not more. This is definitely more is more. And I'll confess that with Spawn of Possession, you know, I love this album and this band, but I do not have as much of a background experience with the previous two records. Just a little bit like, I was thinking of Necrophagist, not Meshuggah. This like took basically what Necrophagist was doing and one-upped it, basically. Unfortunately, this was their last record. They broke up after it a few years later, I think it was. But yeah, Incurso, if you want to hear maybe the most technical metal, extreme metal album ever, this would be probably be my vote. I mean, there's a ton of them on this list. This is, you know, over 200 albums, whatever. There's probably 40 or 50 albums that would just plainly describe as technical metal. This is like the peak of technical metal. Anyway, Incurso, number 28 from Spawn of Possession. Number 27, the top Faith No More record on this list, The Real Thing. Now, you could say, well, this is Faith No More going pop. Well, of course, Epic was everywhere, and it was a pop standard from 1989 and 1990. Still is to this day. You know, they only know one song from Faith No More, just like Sentinel City from Queensrÿche. It's Epic. And Mike Patton's, you know, froggy rapping. What is it? You know, it's almost it almost sounds like a gremlin or a troll, you know, doing vocals, rap metal. But the truth is, you know, and I did not listen to this at the time it came out. I knew Epic, but I didn't know the other songs. There's a lot of other great tracks on this album. Falling to Pieces was also a single, and they did a video for it. That is catchy as hell. Love the keyboard part in that, and the riff, the energy on that riff. And my favorite track on here is The Real Thing. That is, to me, that is them being highly progressive. It's the climax on that is just fantastic. Maybe my favorite thing that Mike Patton's ever done. And if I had one song from Faith No More that I'd vote as my favorite, you know, if I do that list, that's going to be really high on the list. It would be The Real Thing, the title track. In fact, my wife was looking for songs from the year 1989. I think it was 89? Yeah, or the 80s. Maybe it was the 80s. To play on a thing. I could pick anything to put on for her birthday, and I picked The Real Thing from them. You know, of course, she doesn't care for it at all. Yeah, we just needed 80s songs from. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel from her birthday, from one of her birthday parties. But you know, Zombie Eaters was another favorite. Underwater Love. I just found that, you know, a lot of those Faith No More albums from the late 80s and early and 90s, those three records really, I enjoy all of them, but this one to me, I have the most nostalgia for. I feel to be the most accessible with still being experimental and being tongue-in-cheek. It's like taking Faith No More and even Mike Patton's style of music and making it sort of more everyday addictive, you know, in some ways. It's, you know, not over the top, you know, not over the top where it loses me. I know you could say, well, I have Unexpect and SikTh and Mom of the Well. Some of these bands that are just kind of all over the place, and why is that not over the top? I don't know. It's like I evaluate each one of those things case by case, you know. So in this case, it totally works. I love The Real Thing from Faith No More. It's a masterpiece for me. Anyway. Number 27. So this is the last one I'm going to do for this video, this hour-long video. I know it's going to be an hour or maybe more. Embodiment from Sculptured, the top Sculptured record. I had the two other Sculptured records before, way back down on the list. And this is the album that I got into from Sculptured. It came out in 2008. I had really never listened to them. I wasn't really that familiar. I didn't even listen to that much Agalloch, but this thing, I got really attached to it. The samples on it were a big part of the reason why. And, you know, when they put out a record, was it last year, 2021? It was 2021, I think. Yeah, and it wasn't great. Now they're going to be put on another records. I know that Hunter Ginn just joined the band. Don Anderson has more music to put out, but without working in Agalloch anymore, he's probably pretty busy with that. He's focusing more on Sculptured, but the guitar leads, you know, and the vocals are fine. I mean, they're kind of minimalistic. Some of it's sort of shriek, like black metal shrieks and stuff, but they don't use as much horns and stuff like that, but it doesn't matter. I just feel like they kind of substitute that with the samples, and Bodies Without Organs, the title track, Embodiment is the pure. It's not a title track, but Embodiment is the purest form of horror. I think that's the one at the end, the very end of the record, where they use the samples from the movie. It's like a short film about a guy who's in a movie theater watching someone die in the movie, and then he finds himself kind of aging, and it's weird. It's surreal. It's creepy in a way. It's almost out of like a horror movie. The artwork, I remember I got this, is great. I think I've shown it on camera, but I should... Yeah, I think I did, but it's like this translucent thing that you from the human body. It's almost like a thing from like the World Book Encyclopedia when you look it up. We had that when I was growing up, but yeah, it's progressive metal done right. I love this record. 2008 was one of my favorite years of music, and in fact, I should do just a video on that year. But this was among my favorites. I think it was in the top 10 or 15, but for a while there it was like number 1, number 2. So okay. Spoil it. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Like I said, we got 1, maybe 2 more of these videos to do, depending on how long they go. But then I'm going to move on to some other things. A Kevin Gilbert song list. Maybe a Dream Theater song list. Some bunch of song lists. And some maybe songs of the year. A lot of song videos, of course. And I need to do a 2023 preview like Notes Reviews just did. But again, thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. We'll see you next time.